Hey guys, how's it going? Have I got a treat for y'all today? Lately, I've been loving the newest installment in the Fate series, Fate Samurai Remnant. The game itself is chock full of Easter eggs and allusions to other Fate content, and that is information I'd like to get into at some point, but today, I want to bring you all something really interesting. The plot of Samurai Remnant is the forgery of a Holy Grail war. As such, 7 masters and 7 servants appeared to do battle to get their wish granted. Servants are cool and all, but this game did something beyond my expectations by making almost all of the masters known historical figures as well. So today, I want to take a light look into the backgrounds of the real people behind the masters of Samurai Remnant. I'll say up top that if you're concerned about story spoilers, don't be. The most spoilery thing that's going to be said here is the class of each master's servant. Let's start with our protagonist, the ever-serious Miyamoto Iori. A common theme that you will notice here is that a lot of information on these people is sparse, and Iori is no exception to that. He is, however, still well known for being the adoptive son of the world's most famous swordsman slash philosopher slash murder hobo Miyamoto Musashi. Iori was adopted by Musashi at around the age of 11 in the year 1623. There was no particular reason given aside from the fact that he was alone and Musashi took pity on him. Not much is really known about Iori's life before his adoption, but it's assumed that he and Musashi were related to a degree. At the time, Musashi would have been around 39 years old. In the intervening years, it is assumed that Iori would have trained under Musashi until the age of 15. When he joined the household of Ogasawara Tadazane. Under his employ, Iori quickly became one of the daimyo's best warriors and fought alongside his adoptive father in the Shimabara Rebellion. At the age of 26, he was the highest-ranking vassal of the Ogasawara house. Funny enough, it is noted that Iori was apparently not very good with the sword, but rather was a great general and strategist making waves on the sidelines of the battlefield. After this, records more or less fall off aside from the statement in the Harima Kagami, which states that he died at the age of 66. Regardless, that is Miyamoto Iori. Next up, we have Archer's Master Jang Gong. Jang Gong is also known as Kojinga, the Prince of Yanping. Born in 1624 to a Chinese merchant and a Japanese woman simply called Tagawa, he would live in Japan for the first 7 years of his life before moving to Fujian, China. There, he would become a successful candidate for the imperial examination and scored well enough to be considered for state-level positions. He would become an official at the age of 17 and marry at the age of 20. Much like a lot of Chinese records, there's a ton of information on this guy that would require an entire dedicated video, and when he becomes summonable as a servant, we'll talk about the nitty-gritty stuff here. For now, though, here's the SparkNotes version of what's important. At the age of 21, he was installed as the ruler of the Southern Ming Dynasty because China was in a massive civil war at the time. The current rulers were the Ming and the ones attacking were the Qing. Zhang initially had the support of a man named Zhang Zhilong, who would later defect to the Qing side. This defection caused a rift in the balance of power and made ruling the Southern Ming difficult for Zhang alone. As such, he would quickly lose new territory and then the homes of his mercantile family, which resulted in his mother's suicide and other family members' capture. He would eventually gather enough in the way of military forces and support to put himself as the head of his family and lead several successful military campaigns against the Qing. Ultimately, this would lead to an attempt at a treaty, but negotiations fell through after 3 years of discussion. Zhang would then attempt several counterattacks and defensive actions, leading to a number of defeats, but gaining him followers for his resistance to the new reigning Qing. One of his biggest noted follies is the declaration that he wanted one large decisive battle against the Qing, which allowed the better supplied opposition force to rally a number of troops to crush Zhang's forces. It would be after this that he and his troops fled to Taiwan and attacked the Dutch who had settled there. In doing so, he liberated the native Taiwanese who had been colonized by the Dutch at the time, and many of the Dutch were then hunted down and beheaded. Now, the governor of Dutch-ruled Taiwan was none other than Frederick Coyet, the father of Dorothia Coyet, who we will be discussing later. It is from his account that we get information that it was by the hands of a Dutch defector to the Chinese side that Zhang would escape certain death. Supposedly, a captured fort was set to explode with Zhang inside, but he was informed by this defector and able to escape. Mind you, this is a claim only in the Coyet account, so take it with a grain of salt. This capture would end the Dutch 38-year rule in Taiwan. Zhang would die about a year after this at the age of 37 in June of 1662. There are claims that he was actually killed while falling into a fit of madness by his son, but this seems to be a conflated rumor mixed with the real madness he had lamenting allowing his son to succeed him. This is, once again, hyper-condensed, and maybe in a different video we can go into more detail. For now, we're moving on to Lancer's Master. Lancer's Master is a man named Chiemon. Initially, I had suspicions he may actually be Mori Sokien, who is relevant to the story of Samurai Remnant, but this has proved to not be the case. Chiemon is the only full Fate-invented person on this list, at least from what my own research is turning up. Rather, he is simply a survivor of the Shimabara Rebellion, hell-bent on punishing the shogunate, which permitted his family and friends to be massacred. Once again, not a spoiler because that's how they introduced his character before the game was released. As he is a completely fictional character, let's instead talk about the Shimabara Rebellion itself. The rebellion is often described as being a peasant rebellion done by Japanese Catholics for the right to practice their religion. This isn't entirely accurate. The lead up to the actual rebellion is actually one that we see fairly often in Civil War scenarios. The land was affected heavily by a famine in the 1630s, and the lords of the Shimabara area were heavily taxing their peasants to make up for this, so this led to the starvation of many peasants in the area. Couple this with the guy at the top, Matsukura Shigemasa, allocating funds to build himself a new castle, and you can imagine a lot of people were pretty pissed. So, tired of this, the peasants led a revolt against their lords, and many ronin, aka masterless samurai, joined the fray as well. The Christian angle here is that the area where Shimabara was had been a Christian area for a while, and the new lord didn't really like that, and so he heavily persecuted the practicing Christians. This is what inspired the young Amakusa Shiro to take up the reins of leadership and lead the revolt. This culminated into the siege of the Hara Castle, in which the rebels took the castle, but then were sieged by the shogunate's forces for months until they were eventually starved out. It's estimated that around 37,000 were captured and then promptly executed for raising their swords against the shogunate, and after this, Christianity in Japan became effectively banned from being publicly practiced until 1850. Presumably, Chiemon would have been one of the people who got away after their fortifications were broken. Moving on from that happy story, we have Rider's Master Yui Shosetsu. Yui was historically a male and a talented warrior born in 1605 in what is now Shizuoka. Much of his childhood is unknown, but it is presumed that he trained under several ronin who recognized his talents. It would be from their teaching that Shosetsu himself would become a teacher at a samurai academy where he would mingle with others of varying backgrounds and ideologies. Shosetsu gained a level of notoriety for opening his own school and taking in ronin who were growing in numbers due to political changes. So, the shadow over the land at this time was the Tokugawa shogunate, who were doing everything in their power to make sure that they maintained their rule. Remember that less than 100 years ago, Nobunaga had conquered Japan, and the country was united under one central government. In order to maintain this, the Tokugawa made it much more difficult to be a ronin, forcing many of them to be expelled from their domains unless they could find a master to work under. But with the lack of full-on military involvement being the norm, this was proving difficult. It is for this reason that many ronin appear as dirty murder hobos in the game. Yui gave these ronin a place to go. Of these ronin, he befriended one named Marubashi Chuya, with whom he would attempt to depose the Tokugawa. They devised a plot together to use their ronin forces to take over after the death of Tokugawa Iemitsu. However, the plot would be discovered, Marubashi would be captured, and as Yui was surrounded by shogunate officials, he committed seppuku. In response, his body was defiled, his parents and relatives were executed and tortured, and many ronin again had nowhere to go. Yui is a footnote in Japanese history, but a relevant one, showing that even very early on there was a level of serious unrest with the Tokugawa's rule. Moving on, we have Assassin's Master Dorothia Coyette. Dorothea herself is a fictional character, but she comes from a real line of Dutchmen who had an interest in Asia. As mentioned with Jang, Frederick Coyette is the father of Dorothea and is the subject of this section. I say he's a Dutchman, but in reality he's a Swede born in Stockholm, and a member of the nobility. One of his claims to fame is being the first Swede to ever set foot in China and Japan, which I guess had to be somebody. He would join the Dutch East India Trading Company, everybody's favorite trading company, and venture to China and Japan for business, but would be installed as the governor of Formosa, or rather, Taiwan. His opinions on the natives were less than stellar, describing them as weak and effeminate, up until the point when Zhang and his forces came through and removed them from power. For his failings in defending Taiwan from his superior military force, Frederick would be tried for treason and then exiled. He remained in exile for 12 years before he was released and picked back up his occupation as a high-level member of the East India Trading Company. During his time in exile, however, he published a book called Neglected Formosa, where he puts the blame of the area's loss entirely on the trading company. He would spend the remainder of his life as a wealthy noble, dying in 1687 in Amsterdam, survived by his only child, Balthazar Coyette. This does raise a degree of questions as to why Dorothea would have been left out of the historical record, but I'm sure that might be revealed in time. Now for the hardest one I had to research. Caster's Master Tsuchimikado Yasuhiro. He is difficult to do any research into because there's almost no available records on him. He is mentioned in passing and there's more available information on his brother Takatoshi. He was almost certainly the one picked for this role because it just aligned well with the timeline in the Fate Samurai Remnant universe. As such, let's just talk about the Tsuchimikado line as a whole, and the role that Amyodo held in Edo-era Japan and before. The Tsuchimikado are the line of descendants of the Abe clan, namely the famed Heian-era Amyoji Abe no Seimei. Yasuhiro himself would have been the 20th generation of that line. Amyodo is the combined art of astrology, fortune-telling, divination, and magic, and originated in China. To put it into Western words, they serve the same purpose as a court wizard may in the medieval era. While magic is certainly a difficult thing to prove, the ability to divine certain outcomes is a practiced talent. As such, the ability to predict what the future may hold has always been a highly sought after ability, and the Japanese made a whole governmental department dedicated to the onmyoji. They began falling out of favor after the Heian era due to the fact that swords in anger have a tendency to deal with wizards in a very real and permanent way. Thus, the role of the onmyoji was downplayed. They would see a resurgence after the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate, where the Tsuchimikado line would be the official recognized onmyodo line. They would hold this position until Emperor Meiji took back control and abolished onmyoji as being unneeded any longer. There is a genuine level of superstition that onmyoji of old helped to alleviate, but in modern times this is done through science rather than divination. Much in the same way that people in the West no longer rely on alchemists to discover elements, Japan evolved beyond the need for onmyodo. Our final master is the Master Berserker Takao Dayu. Takao is her name and Dayu is her position, one given to top-level courtesans of Japan's Edo red light districts. There are two split histories involving Takao that we will get into. The first is the fictional one that has been popularized and dramatized by kabuki theater. Both accounts start the exact same way, in that Takao is a young woman who debuted in Yoshiwara in 1655, and her beauty and presence made her so popular that she rapidly rose through the courtesan ranks until she was at the level of Dayu. The fictionalized tale of Takao Dayu is that of a lord named Date Tsunamune. He was sent to the red light district to defame himself so that his uncle could take over his position. While there, he caught a glimpse of Takao Dayu and fell in love with her. He offered to buy her contract, but she rejected him, saying that she was waiting for her own lover when her contract expired. Despite this, Date went to the brothel's owner and demanded to purchase her contract for the girl's weight in gold. The owner weighed down Takao's sleeves with iron to make her impossibly heavier, but Date spent his funds and purchased the contract regardless. What happens next varies, but the end result is always the same. Takao rejects Date still, and in a rage he kills her. In some versions, he tortures her first, in others she attempts to drown herself and he kills her instead. In every version, she dies. This is not the reality of the situation. Takao Dayu does indeed die a young woman at just the age of 19. However, it is in a much less dramatic fashion. Instead, it is believed that she died of a disease, most often of pneumonia or tuberculosis, and a massive memorial was held in her honor. This was actually controversial for the time because despite her popularity and gentle nature, her former suitors left her to rot while she was sick and didn't aid her when they could have, leading her to die. So that is all of the masters, but I want to bring up something interesting. The fact that they have veiled almost all of these characters with historical people as well is not a coincidence. Because this is Fate, everything ties back into Grand Order, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these faces making their way into the halls of Chaldea at some point in the future. Making the masters themselves potential candidates for servants is an interesting idea, and one that may very well come to fruition. If not, I really enjoy these characters in Samurai Remnant, and you should go and play that now. For now though, do all the YouTube stuff. Let me know what you thought down in the comments, check out my Discord, Twitch, and Twitter, but for now guys, keep your chin up, peace.